So the paradox, if there is a paradox, and I'm not sure there is a paradox, but if there's a paradox with respect to voluntary movement in functional neurological disorders, and in particular functional movement disorders, is that the movements that are made, the involuntary movements that are made, are involuntary. However, the best that we can tell, the movements utilize voluntary mechanisms for producing the movements. Now, this gets into the subtleties of how the brain works in terms of making voluntary and involuntary movements. We have some pretty good idea of what those mechanisms are in terms of making voluntary movements. And patients with functional movement disorders utilize those mechanisms, yet the movements are involuntary to them. So the question then becomes, to a certain extent, what is the nature of voluntariness? How do we understand what that term really means and how people experience the sense of voluntariness? Now, we are beginning to understand that too. And the experience of voluntariness requires the activity of certain networks in the brain, and those networks give us that sense of voluntariness. Those networks are not functioning normally in patients who have functional movement disorders, and therefore we can understand how they are involuntary even though they use voluntary mechanisms for the production of the movement itself. Well, I think that the patients are well aware of having the movements. There isn't any difficulty with their awareness of them. The question is what is actually producing them. That's the issue that is really relevant. There is a difference, and again, these are subtleties in understanding how the brain works, but there's an important aspect called body ownership. And body ownership is the sense that our arm is a part of us, our movements are a part of us. And body ownership is generally normal in the patients. The question is who is responsible for the movements, or what is responsible for the movements? And that's where there's this sense of involuntariness, but there's no difficulty in recognizing that the movement has taken place.